Metaliteracy in Virtual Metamodern Libraries. And this session is going to focus on the book that you can see here on the first slide, and focus on how literacy has changed in our lifetimes, which is a very exciting time to live because there's been dramatic changes. So there are 9 chapters in this book, and I'm going to do a quick overview of all 9 chapters and then leave time at the end for questions on particular parts that you find interesting or you'd like to hear a little more about. The 2 terms that I'm going to use in this book are metamodernism and metaliteracy. I didn't come up with these terms. Metamodernism is a term that many people are using for our philosophical era, the moment we live in right now. And I've read quite a bit of the work of Robin van Denneker, a professor in the Netherlands, and he uses the word metamodernism and has adopted that to talk about our philosophical era. And then the term metaliteracy was developed by Tom Mackey and Trudy Jacobson, and they use that quite a bit with the American Library Association, who has also adopted that term metaliteracy. So I'll explain both terms a little bit better as we go along. So in the preface to the book, I talk a little bit about how our culture has drastically changed because the Gutenberg parentheses have closed. In other words, for 500 years, from about the year 1500 to the year 2000, the printed book was king of the hierarchy of information. We all were able to have access to print. Prior to the Gutenberg press, most people did not read. They did not have access to books, of course. So now book is no longer the top format. And so those parentheses have closed. And I found that a fascinating term, Gutenberg parentheses, when I first heard it. If you can look that up later, it's from Professor Lars Sauerberg, and Thomas Pettit has done a lot of research on the Gutenberg parentheses. But I wonder if any of you have sensed in the last years, really since the turn of the century, that literacy has changed. And that sense of feeling is what I'm going to talk about today. That's a metamodern sense of feeling, that things have changed. So metamodernism is our philosophical moment. Many of you are probably aware and have heard of the term postmodernism. Postmodernism was a time where there was a lot of dystopian fiction coming out. There was deconstruction of grand narratives, tearing down all of the narratives that we've had in the past and sort of thinking in new ways. There was a lot of irony going on in the last half of the 20th century. But that era has ended. And I sort of began to sense this feeling that it had ended as digital culture was arising and everyone was getting laptops, mobile devices, and my library was really becoming a lot of digital formats rather than print. And that's when I began to get this sense of feeling that things were changing. Now there's a spiral on this screen because learning is a spiral. All of life is built on spirals and swinging to and fro, and metamodernism is a perfect match for this spiral and the oscillation between physical, digital, physical, and virtual. So that's why I really wanted to focus on the merge between metamodernism, our philosophical moment, and literacy, or metaliteracy, as you'll come to hear a little bit more about. So I've been really interested in the fact that the human brain is changing. A lot of teachers have told me, that have taught for a lot of years, that children think a bit differently now. So I've been doing some research on how the internet has impacted our brain. And one of the best books that I've read about this is Dear Reader, Come Home by Marianne Wolf. She talks about how children, maybe in the future, are developing a biliterate brain, able to switch between physical and virtual, or physical and digital, because they'll be able to swing in this metamodern era and between opposites and swing back and forth easily. But Marianne Wolf also talks about the importance of giving print books to young children for their developing brain. So there's a lot that needs to be researched on the internet and how it is changing our brain. Now, just as writing, I'm a national writing trainer. When I was a school librarian, I loved bringing books to children and young adults and getting them to write in journals. And I found that writing was this recursive spiral of pre-writing, revising, reflecting, proofreading, and going back and forth. And so too, just like that recursive process, metamodernism looks back at the past and sort of as a spiral. And unlike postmodernism, which deconstructed grand narratives, metamodernism respects the past and values history. And we look back on what was tradition and innovation. We want to balance tradition and innovation. So each chapter in this book really focuses on metamodernism, and this is chapter 2 that I'm talking about now, focuses on metamodernism, but also narrows it down to how does metamodernism, how does it relate to literacy? Because that's my background, and it's a fascinating time to see how literacy is really changing. And one of the biggest changes in literacy is, of course, digital devices and digital trends. And so, primarily in the past, it was print books, as I mentioned, but now we have a lot of digital trends, and students come into the library, kindergartners come in more comfortable with a mouse than they are a pencil, and they're very used to digital devices. So some of the 5 really important trends that most researchers are looking at for the next 5 years are online learning and MOOCs, which of course the pandemic really has made everyone forced to move online. Then competency-based education, which is a little bit more personalized. The Internet of Things, where a lot of the devices and things right around our home are going to be connected to the internet. And even wearable technologies such as the smart watches and our clothing that can be also connected to the internet. Virtual reality and augmented reality, which has kind of been my focus. I met Rosanna, I know her as P, in Second Life over a decade ago. And as she mentioned, I am the director of the Community Virtual Library in Second Life and other virtual learning environments. So VR has really been a focus for me in libraries. And then the 5th really important trend to watch over the next 5 years is artificial intelligence. All of these trends are definitely going to impact literacy. Now, literacy and digital culture, there is a dark side to all of this. And I've found parents sometimes come to me with questions about how this is changing their lives, their home life, their children's life. They're worried about the future of learning. So chapter 4 addresses the dark side of digital culture. Some people even fear that we may enter what they're calling a digital dark age in the future. And I'll go into that a little bit more in another chapter. But some of the problems that people bring to me, or that I've even encountered myself, are on this slide. Creating personal dashboards of information. Each of us has on our phone, our tablet, our computer, our desktop, wherever we're getting our information, we can personalize our dashboard to decide what we want to be coming to us, our incoming apps, whether that's social media, various news apps, different social networks. And there's a fear that a lot of us are choosing to create networks and follow people who think just like us. And that's not a good way to learn. Vygotsky, if many of you are familiar with Lev Vygotsky, a very highly respected child developmental psychologist, he said we learn in collision with others, thinking differently, not just following people and talking to people who think just like us. So having a personal dashboard, that can be a problem. And it's also the next one here, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means we only want to pull in information that agrees with our own opinion. We want to follow people who think like us, and that could be a problem for the future. And then, of course, resource evaluation. Librarians are trained to help learners navigate the huge information landscape that's out there today and teach the next generation how to evaluate resources and how to seek out true information and facts in a post-truth era. Thomas Mackey, who wrote several meta-literacy books, talks about how we now live in a post-truth world, and finding accurate information is very difficult. The third thing that's kind of difficult in digital culture is FOMO. Most of you may be aware that FOMO stands for fear of missing out. Young people sometimes are on their social devices, their social media on their digital devices, scrolling because they feel like they might miss out and they want to be in touch with their friends and their network. And another thing that's a problem is the edited life. Sherry Turkle calls this edited life. Young people spend a lot of time on their social media accounts, putting their personal life and editing their life and taking pictures and using filters to make them look beautiful, especially Instagram. And my daughter mentioned that can even be a problem with self-esteem, especially with young girls who want to make everything really pretty. And she told me sometimes there's a competition in, oh, who has the prettiest life with their edited photos. And that can really be a problem when young people spend more time editing their life than they do actually living their life. Another problem we have is too much information coming at us every day on too many communication channels. Another concern is the death of privacy. This chapter goes into all of the different ways that we can think about privacy in the future. And then, of course, big data and cybersecurity. Some of these have even been on the news with congressional hearings on the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and this all relates to all of these problems in digital culture, which affect literacy. So what is meta-literacy? Well, meta-literacy is, here's one definition that I write in the book. It presents a way to advance information literacy by focusing directly on the relationships among cognate literacies and by clearly identifying the fluence of emerging technologies on mobile, open, and networked learning. In other words, meta-literacy is literacy in digital culture. It's the fact that we're prosumers, both taking in information off the internet daily, moment by moment, and sharing information digitally, moment by moment, 24/7. We have our smartphones, I'll hold mine up right here, right with us in our pockets, right beside us all the time, and students often have it right by their bed. It's their alarm clock. And that is meta-literacy. It's literacy that shares in and out. And this wheel that you see on the screen here, students now are participants, communicators, translators, authors, producers. We play all these roles as meta-literate learners. And it's a lot to take in, but it's basically where we are on our digital devices all the time. And we need to teach our students how to be really good digital citizens. That's the most important thing in meta-literacy. So I want to talk a little bit about this metamodernism concept and our philosophical moment, because it's so fascinating where we live now. Modernism began during the Industrial Revolution, and there was this cry, make it new, make it new. Everyone wanted new things in the early 1900s. Art, music, architecture, literature, all of this reflected the early 1900s. Some examples, would be Claude Monet and the Impressionists in art. Then in the mid 1900s, we moved to postmodernism, and nobody has an exact date for any of these philosophical eras because they sort of, they flow from one to the next. Well, in the when we moved into postmodernism, there was a rise in irony and dystopian outlooks. And it was just a whole different sense of feeling as we moved into different kinds of art and literature and architecture. Then at the turn of the century, right around the turn of the century, some people think a little before, for some it's a little after, we moved into metamodernism. Now this is not a name that's set in stone. Some people are calling it postmodernism. I find that a little redundant. It sounds kind of funny to put postmodernism. So I'm really an advocate for using the term metamodernism. I think it's very clear in the fact that we, as librarians, we now work a lot with metadata, being data about the data on the online and digital culture. Metamodernism just seems to fit. A lot of people are agreeing. The next chapter that I go into, and you can be jotting down some questions if any of these concepts are confusing or there's a chapter that sounds particularly interesting to you. This chapter is an important chapter for me because I've worked as Rosanna said in the introduction, I've been in virtual environments since 2007. And I'm currently exploring with VR headsets, but I'm finding with the VR headsets that it's much more productive to use virtual reality on a desktop without that cumbersome headset where you feel trapped. You can see on this slide an old-fashioned learning environment in rows of desks. That is very modern. That was early, in the 1900s, prior to postmodernism. And then we began to shift into more collaborative learning. Now we have educators working in virtual environments like Second Life. Many other virtual environments are out there where students can come inside an environment with a sense of presence where you're with other people. Now, right now we're on Zoom and you can see me, but you know that we are not in the same space. So in webinars and most online environments, there's a lot of interactivity and you can see each other, but you don't share a space. When you're in a virtual learning environment, there's a sense of presence that you're in a space together, which is a very valuable experience. So this chapter talks more about learning environments, traditional, online, blended learning environments, MOOCs, and then virtual immersive learning environments where students can actually enter an environment virtually. Now, even very young students are entering these environments. I brought my fifth grade class, several fifth grade classes in my school library into Minecraft. They built the entire school library in Minecraft. And I challenged them to build a digital citizenship game where they could teach younger students elements of digital citizenship, like privacy, online security, and things like that. So very young students are already learning how to code. And so they're learning about these digital and virtual environments right now. So educators need to learn how to use them for best practices for learning and the advantages of those. And more research needs to be done, certainly for all age brackets. The next chapter that I'm going to talk about is really, really important. And this chapter deals more with what I talked about in the dark side of digital culture in chapter 4, the fact that it may be, some people are predicting some real concerns for our future that we could enter a digital dark age, meaning that so much of our information could be lost that it would be as dark as it was prior to the printing press. In other words, when you think about it, lack of information, no information at all coming to you is a big problem, but way, way, way too much information coming to you is just as big a problem. And also, when we change formats, sometimes these formats of information become obsolete and they are lost forever. You can see on the slide here up at the top, there's a picture that came from the Dead Sea Scrolls that have been unearthed, and scientists are able to read them and find out what was going on, centuries and centuries ago. Well, in my research, I found there was a man who was learning about the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he had a lot of data on floppy disks, which you can see on the underneath the sea scroll image. He had written a lot of his research on floppy disks and had a major computer problem, and the data became corrupted on the floppy disks. He lost all of his research work. And he found it very ironic that the Dead Sea Scrolls that were just unearthed, you could still read them. But his data that he had just written just weeks ago and months ago was completely lost forever and no way to recover it. That's a huge problem with digital data. If we don't migrate to a different format, our digital data can be lost forever. So of course, librarians are aware of this, and most librarians who understand archival tell their students and their colleagues that we need to put things in more than one format. And in fact, archivists say in at least 2 formats and in at least 2 places if something is very important. But you can see here some of the obsolete formats that are out there now. Some of you may even remember 8-track tapes, audio tapes. There's VHS tapes on the screen here. I remember when my school library invested a lot of money in these giant data discs, way bigger than DVDs and CDs, and they became obsolete very quickly. So it's difficult sometimes for us to know which formats are going to survive, which are going to become obsolete. And this is it's really an important thing that we think about. The librarian, the archivist of the United States, his name is David Ferriero. I watched a webinar that was put out by the American Library Association, and David Ferriero said, the biggest thing that keeps him up at night is worrying about the archival of data, because everything now is born digital. And if we're not able to migrate to new formats, much of our data will be lost forever. Many things are never in print format. And there are so many, this chapter goes into, and this is chapter 8. I talk in this chapter about the many formats of audio, video, documents, images, and right now MP3 is the big format for audio, and MP4 for video. But that will change, and we will have to be able to migrate all of our files and upgrade them to another format. So it's an interesting time. We have to be aware of literacy formats and how they are changing, and how we can best preserve them for generations to come. So I know I'm going through my chapters very quickly. Chapter 9 sums up the whole book and why I wrote it. I wrote this book because digital citizenship has become my passion. And people sometimes, they think that's just an academic jargon word, digital citizenship. Oh yeah, what's the importance of that? Well, really, we are all digital citizens now. Whether you have an avatar or not, we all live in virtual environments. I was on the city bus going downtown one day. I looked around me on the bus. Every single person on the bus was staring into a digital device. They were not looking at each other. They were not talking. They were on a digital device. They were elsewhere. They were in a virtual environment. Everyone was in a different one, but they were in one. And they're all digital citizens. That's where we live now. We spend more time in our digital environments, really, mentally, than we do in our physical ones. So understanding digital citizenship is now imperative. And the information revolution has changed literacy forever. We won't be going back to the old way, although I personally still love print books, and I'm sure many of you do too. But we live in a really fascinating, fast-paced time, no matter what that time is called. Most of us are aware that it seems to be changing quickly. And that's why I've chosen to use the term metamodernism. And we'll see if everyone else adopts that term or not. That remains to be seen. I've put a picture here of the community virtual library in Second Life. That's part of the island right there. And shortly I'm going to go into Second Life to show you the library there, where I've done some presentations on my book. And all of the slides that you've just seen, I have a presentation there where people can actually walk into the slides so that I can share them with people and interact and talk about all of these chapters. And I also have a couple of references here that I'll leave on screen for just a moment. And then I'm going to pull up my contact information as well, if you should want to contact me later about with any questions or for future collaborations. So let me see. Exit my full screen here and show you my contact information first. Let's see here. Might put this in text chat. And then I'm going to go into Second Life. So let's pull up the chat here. Okay, let's see. I'll put that in just a second. I'll just move this over and text chat. I'm not used to finding text chat with a shared screen. So let's see if I can find it here. Okay. Chat, found it. Okay, here's my contact information. And now I'm going to take you all into Second Life. So, okay, let's see here. Now, the first place I'm going to take you when we get into Second Life is the Community Virtual Library main branch. I also network with a colleague in the UK who has an information science. She's a professor of information science. She has an island where she has a lot of resources on information literacy, and she's placed my several presentations there. So maybe we'll have time to go over there as well. I'll turn off my sound here. Okay, pull this down. All right, now hopefully you can still see me very well here. Things are rezzing, and then I'll show you Second Life here. Turn off my music. Okay. All right, let's see if I can make this a little bigger. Oh, and there's a librarian on duty right now, and this is Bethany. I'll use chat to there's a librarian on duty. See if I can move these pictures out of the way so I can say hello to Bethany. Stand up. I'm going to say hi to Bethany. And tell her that I'm doing a presentation with P. Okay, P's right behind her. Now I'm not turning on my Second Life voice because it'll be easier for me to keep the voice going here in Zoom, but hopefully you all can see here. And I'm going to move this over, make this just a little bit bigger. Let's see here, full screen, and then I can always, so you can see a little bit better. Okay, I'll walk into the library. Bethany is one of our volunteers here, and she is an instructional designer at San Jose State University. Let's see if I can zoom in. I'm on a different computer than I normally am on, so I'll show you Bethany here. Okay, and there's P. Okay, I'll walk inside the library, move this over a little bit. This is a real working library. You can see we have resources in here. Later, you can go to our website if you'd like to learn more about what the Community Virtual Library offers. We network with a lot of universities and schools and people who are interested in virtual environments. And we share information here. And this is our reference desk. You can see here at the back. P, that's Rosanna. She works here as a reference librarian as well. I do, and many other people work here to help people understand metaliteracy and how literacy is changing in virtual environments. And then we're going to teleport over to my slides in just a moment. You can see this area is our main library. We also have a lot of other areas on this island with different events where people can have book discussions. We have a music library. We have live music concerts at times at that music library. We have a presentation area where we have the American library association's ACRL group. We have presentations there monthly, and there's a place where people can sit and gather and have presentations. Those are a few of the things that we do here at CVL. Now I'm going to walk outside and tell Bethany that we're going to head over to. Now I'm on a laptop today because my other computer, I'm getting a different computer, so it may not be as clear as it normally is, but hopefully you get the idea. I'll tell Bethany we're going over to see the Metaliteracy exhibit. It's at a place called InfoLit Island. Bethany cannot hear me since I'm in Zoom and didn't fix my sound here, but Bethany does a lot of research in VR as well as, and we call Second Life virtual reality, even though it's desktop virtual reality. You're on a desktop, but you are together inside a virtual environment. So my definition of virtual reality includes virtual worlds. That's yet to be seen if everyone agrees, because this is all, of course, changing. All right, P, I'm going to head over to InfoLit Island. So I'm going to look in my landmarks right here and find it. InfoLit at the Symbolic Modeling exhibition, where we've been making some symbolic models of metaliteracy. People have come in and built in 3D how they feel about changing literacy. And I've built a few models of literacy along with my colleague Sheila Weber from the UK. She's an information literacy expert, really. Okay, we'll teleport over there. All right, this is going to be Sheila's Island. Move this so you can see, move a couple of things off the screen. These models over here are people's representation of how they feel with changing literacy. And it's kind of interesting to have them talk about how it feels to have information coming at you all the time and how you relate to that. People can come here and take the information about my book on this little easel, to find out about it. You can see there's kind of a turning sign. The many faces of information literacy is scrolling there above me. And I'm going to walk up this little ramp. I've brought people here to a presentation about metaliteracy. And when they come, you'll have a whole lot of avatars all just standing around, walking around my slides. So they're actually together in this space. So I'm going to sit up on my first slide here. Put my little chair up here and sit. All right, here I am sitting up on top of my slide. So you can see I'm on it and you all are with me, and you can remember this is how the slides that I've been through, talking about the Gutenberg parentheses closing and our philosophical moment and all of the various things about metaliteracy here on my slides. One thing about a virtual environment like this that's nice is you can change your sun. I can go to midnight if I'm at an event where someone might be sharing fireworks and it's very dark, or I can change to midday if I want it to be daytime or sunset or whatever time, depending on what kind of a learning experience you're having. I'll go to midday. All right, so I think a lot of these chapters are probably interesting to you, depending on whether you're faculty or you're administration, or you are an instructional designer or a librarian or a classroom teacher on a specific subject area. You may have found one of these particular chapters more